Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a new episode of Great Books in 10 Minutes. This is the second part of our 3-episode series on George Orwell's seminal work, 1984. If you haven't watched the first part, you can find the link in the description box and in the pinned comment. Before we start, if you haven't downloaded it yet, the free companion app for this channel is available on both the Apple Store and Google Play Store. With this app, you'll get access to bonus content, trivia quizzes tailored to each episode, and a free ebook library to deepen your understanding of the classics. To download, simply scan the QR codes with your phone or click the links in the description box below. One morning at work, Winston was heading toward the men's room when he caught sight of the dark-haired girl from the fiction department. As the girl drew closer, Winston noticed her right arm was in a sling, cleverly blending in with her overalls and barely visible from a distance. He figured she must have injured her hand while maneuvering one of the large kaleidoscopes in the fiction department, where plots for novels were hastily sketched out. It was a frequent mishap among the workers there. They were only about 4 meters apart when the girl suddenly stumbled and fell, nearly crashing face first onto the ground. A sharp cry of pain escaped her lips, the agony clear as she must have landed directly on her already injured arm. Winston rushed to help her up. In that fleeting moment, she slipped him a note. His heart raced as he unfolded it to read the unexpected words, "I love you." Winston was stunned. For a long time he had been wary of this girl, convinced she might be a political spy sent to monitor him. But there she was, declaring her love. The note's message stirred a tumultuous storm within him, filled with confusion and hope. Before he could fully grasp the implications of this revelation, Parsons, ever the enthusiastic party member, interrupted with chatter about his preparations for the upcoming hate week. Despite the intrusion, the note from the dark-haired girl ignited in Winston a newfound and intense will to live. Over the next few days, Winston was a bundle of nerves, avoiding any direct communication with the girl. Finally, he mustered the courage to sit at the same lunchroom table as her. They spoke in hushed tones, heads bowed to avoid drawing attention. They arranged to meet in Victory Square, a place where they could blend into the crowd and escape the prying eyes of the telescreens. When they met in the square, the atmosphere was tense. They witnessed a convoy of Eurasian prisoners being harassed by a vicious mob, a grim reminder of the party's cruelty. Amid the chaos, the girl whispered directions to Winston for their secret rendezvous. She told him to catch a train from Paddington Station to a remote spot in the countryside. Despite the surroundings and the ever-present danger, they managed to hold hands briefly, their connection, a fleeting, precious respite from the relentless surveillance and control of their world. Winston, his heart racing with anticipation, followed through with the plan as he and the dark-haired girl finally met in the countryside. Although he was still uncertain about what to expect, his earlier fears that she might be a party spy had begun to dissipate. He remained cautious, his eyes scanning the surroundings for hidden microphones in the bushes, but he found solace in the girl's calm and confident demeanor. Winston took the girl's hand and, with a hint of surprise, admitted that until that moment he hadn't noticed the color of her eyes. Now he saw that they were a light shade of brown with dark lashes. Winston confessed that he was 39 years old, trapped in a marriage he couldn't escape, plagued by varicose veins and burdened with 5 false teeth. The girl, who later introduced herself as Julia, was unfazed and told him she couldn't care less. Julia then, with a decisive gesture, ripped off her junior anti-sex league sash, a symbol of her prior allegiance to the party's repressive rules. The act felt liberating to Winston, who now saw a side of Julia that defied the party's constraints. As they ventured deeper into the woods, the tension between them became palpable. When they finally embraced, it was an experience that surpassed even Winston's most fervent dreams. The act of making love was a powerful, almost euphoric rebellion against the party's cold, controlling ideology. Afterward, as they lay together in the forest's embrace, Winston's curiosity led him to ask Julia if she had had similar encounters before. She admitted, with a mixture of nonchalance and defiance, that she had been with numerous men. This revelation delighted Winston. The idea that Julia had shared her defiance with many others only deepened his affection for her. To him, her numerous past lovers symbolized a broader rebellion against the party's cruel norms and an act of subversive resistance. As soon as Julia had woken up, her demeanor shifted to one of alertness and efficiency. She quickly dressed, tied the scarlet sash around her waist, and began planning their journey home. Winston left the details to her, recognizing her practical cunning and extensive knowledge of the countryside around London, gained from countless community hikes. She outlined a different route for Winston, leading him to a separate railway station, and advised him never to return home the same way he had come. Julia instructed Winston to wait half an hour before leaving and mentioned a place where they could meet after work in 4 days. It was a busy street in a poorer area filled with market stalls. Julia planned to blend in by pretending to shop for shoelaces or thread. If it was safe to talk when Winston approached, she would discreetly blow her nose. Otherwise, he was to walk past her without acknowledgement. If all went well, they should have about 15 minutes to arrange their next meeting amidst the crowd. She and Winston eventually resumed their routine lives, though their clandestine meetings continued in the shadows of the city. Over the next few weeks, their encounters were brief but intense, each one steeped in secrecy. One day, they met in the hushed remains of a crumbling church. Amid the whispers of its decay, Julia shared with Winston the details of her life in a hostel, where she lived with 30 other girls. She recounted her first forbidden sexual encounter with a sense of both excitement and detachment. Unlike Winston, who yearned for a broader rebellion, Julia's desires were more immediate and personal. Her thrill came from outsmarting the party and indulging in forbidden pleasures. She revealed to Winston that the party's ban on sex was not just about control, but a strategic move to redirect the citizens' sexual frustration into intense hostility toward party enemies and fervent adoration of Big Brother. Winston, in turn, opened up about a disturbing memory from his past. He described a walk he had taken with his former wife, Catherine, during which he had fantasized about pushing her off a cliff. To Winston, it would have made little difference whether he had actually followed through with the act. The forces that dominated their lives rendered any individual rebellion meaningless in the face of their overwhelming control. Winston surveyed the small, shabby room above Mr. Charrington's shop, a place he had rented for what he now saw as a foolish affair with Julia. At that moment, Winston remembered that Mr. Charrington had easily agreed to rent the room to him, clearly pleased with the extra money it would bring him. He hadn't seemed shocked or acted suspiciously when he realized Winston wanted the room for a love affair. Outside, a burly woman with red arms had hung her laundry to dry, her off-key singing drifting through the window. Winston and Julia had been caught up in the whirlwind of preparations for Hate Week, which left them frustrated by their infrequent meetings. Winston yearned for a simpler, more romantic existence with Julia, something akin to the comfortable routine of an old married couple. Julia arrived with a small treasure trove: sugar, coffee, and bread, luxuries typically reserved for the inner party elite. She applied her makeup, and her vibrant beauty and femininity left Winston breathless. As they relaxed in bed later that evening, Julia noticed the paperweight on the table and asked about it. Winston explained that the paperweight symbolized a connection to the past, a relic from a time before the party's dominance. They began to sing a nostalgic song about St. Clement's Church, and Julia mentioned her plan to clean the old picture of the church someday. After Julia departed, Winston remained alone, lost in thought. He gazed at the crystal paperweight, imagining a life trapped within its fragile sphere, an eternal sanctuary where he and Julia could exist forever, untouched by the world outside. As Winston had feared, Syme vanished without warning. One morning he simply didn't show up for work, prompting a few careless remarks from his colleagues. By the next day, no one mentioned him at all. On the third day, Winston visited the vestibule of the records department to check the notice board. Among the notices was a printed list of the chess committee members, which had previously included Syme. The list looked almost identical to how it had before. Nothing was crossed out, but now it was one name shorter. The city, now throbbing with the heat of summer, buzzed with frenetic energy as Hate Week approached. Parsons, ever the enthusiastic party supporter, adorned every available surface with colorful ribbons, while his children enthusiastically belted out a new anthem, aptly named Hate Song, dedicated to the upcoming event. Winston's thoughts, however, were preoccupied with the room above Mr. Charrington's shop. His love for this room grew daily, consuming his mind even when he was unable to visit. He imagined scenarios where his wife Catherine met an untimely end, freeing him to marry Julia, and even dreamed of reinventing himself as one of the proles, living a life free from the party's suffocating grip. In their secret meetings, Winston and Julia discussed the mysterious brotherhood. Winston shared his unsettling sense of connection with O'Brien, whom he suspected might be secretly against the party. Julia, however, dismissed these concerns with a casual air, suggesting that the war and enemies like Emmanuel Goldstein were merely fabrications of the party itself. Her indifferent attitude and apparent lack of deep concern irritated Winston. He reproached her, accusing her of being a rebel only in the most superficial ways, with her defiance restricted to physical pleasures rather than meaningful resistance. Winston's long-held anticipation finally materialized when he encountered O'Brien, the enigmatic figure he had been waiting for his entire life. The meeting took place in a dimly lit hallway at the Ministry of Truth, where the air was thick with the weight of secrecy. Winston's emotions were a whirlwind of anxiety and exhilaration as he stood face to face with the man who represented both hope and fear. O'Brien's demeanor was as elusive as ever, but his words offered a glimmer of promise. He cryptically mentioned Syme, a colleague who had mysteriously disappeared, and then casually suggested that Winston might be interested in seeing a Newspeak dictionary if he visited O'Brien's residence one evening. This offhand invitation felt like a momentous event to Winston, who sensed that this encounter was a pivotal step in the journey he had begun the day he first questioned the party's omnipotence. As he left the hallway, Winston was engulfed by a dark foreboding. The path he was now on, marked by this significant meeting with O'Brien, seemed inexorably tied to his eventual fate at the Ministry of Love. He grimly contemplated that this path could very well lead to his own demise. Despite the shadow of impending doom, Winston was exhilarated by the prospect of visiting O'Brien's home. The address O'Brien had given him felt like a lifeline, a beacon of possibility amidst the suffocating darkness of his world. One morning, Winston jolted awake, tears streaming down his face, in the room above Mr. Charrington's quaint antiques shop. Julia, who was beside him, gently asked what was troubling him. Through his tears, Winston revealed a haunting dream about his mother, a dream that had forced him to confront a buried guilt he had never fully acknowledged. He confessed that until that moment, he had harbored a subconscious belief that he was somehow responsible for her death. A flood of repressed memories crashed over him. Winston recalled the chaotic and desperate atmosphere of his childhood, marked by the constant threat of air raids, long lines for food, and the distant sounds of machine gun fire. He remembered scavenging with other boys, searching through garbage for scraps of food, and waiting by the roadside for trucks carrying cattle feed, hoping for any spillage. His father's disappearance had left his mother emotionally drained and lifeless, moving mechanically through daily chores while nursing his sickly younger sister. Driven by an insatiable hunger, Winston fought relentlessly for his share of the meager food, often taking more than his fair portion and neglecting his sister's needs. One day, when a rare chocolate ration was issued, Winston selfishly demanded the entire portion for himself. After a heated argument, his mother reluctantly gave him the majority, leaving only a small piece for his sister. In a moment of uncontrollable greed, Winston snatched the remaining chocolate from his sister and ran away, ignoring his mother's pleas to return. As he fled, he sensed that something terrible was imminent, feeling an overwhelming guilt as he realized that his sister might be dying, yet he could not bring himself to go back. The party's relentless suppression of human emotions had left him bitter and resentful. He loathed how the party had stripped away the very essence of human connection and warmth. To him, the proles remained the last bastion of genuine humanity, while party members like himself and Julia had been forced into an emotional desolation that felt almost inhuman. The weight of their situation pressed heavily upon them. Winston and Julia both understood the grim reality. If they were caught, they faced a future of torture and death. The thought of their sanctuary, the room above Mr. Charrington's shop, being a potential trap only heightened their anxiety. They exchanged uneasy reassurances, clinging to the belief that while the party's torture might force them to confess their darkest secrets, it could not extinguish the love they shared. Despite their mutual agreement that abandoning the room would be the safest choice, they found themselves unable to leave, their love and fear entwined in a precarious balance. Winston and Julia embarked on a daring journey to O'Brien's luxurious apartment, fully aware of the perilous nature of their decision. Upon entering the opulent space, they were immediately struck by the stark contrast to their grim reality. O'Brien, with a knowing smile, surprised them by turning off the telescreen, an act of rebellion that signified their brief respite from the party's all-seeing eye. Feeling a surge of exhilaration and liberation, Winston boldly asserted that he and Julia were enemies of the party, seeking to join the elusive brotherhood. O'Brien's reaction was both reassuring and electrifying. O'Brien's servant, a man named Martin, brought them drinks. O'Brien poured a dark red liquid into the glasses and with a faint smile revealed that it was called wine, something Winston had only read about in books. He explained that it was rare for the outer party to have access to it. With a solemn expression, O'Brien then raised his glass and proposed a toast. To our leader, to Emmanuel Goldstein. Winston curiously asked O'Brien if Emmanuel Goldstein and the resistance were real. O'Brien confirmed that the Brotherhood was real. Emmanuel Goldstein existed, and he was indeed alive. After a series of questions through which O'Brien tested Winston's dedication to the cause of the revolution, he reminded them that they would fight in the dark against a powerful enemy, and that when they received orders, they must obey them. As the evening unfolded, O'Brien poured them more wine, and Winston, filled with nostalgia and hope, proposed a toast to the past. A tribute to memories and ideals that seemed almost forgotten. Julia soon excused herself, and O'Brien promised Winston a copy of Goldstein's book, the manifesto that encapsulated the revolutionary ideology they longed to embrace. He also hinted at the possibility of their paths crossing again in the future. When Winston inquired whether O'Brien meant their meeting would happen in the place where there is no darkness, O'Brien confirmed with a cryptic nod, repeating the phrase. After an exhausting 90-hour work week, Winston had barely been holding on. During Hate Week, the party's frantic pace had intensified, with Oceania abruptly switching its enemies and allies in the never-ending war. This sudden change had landed Winston with an overwhelming amount of work to manage, as the party scrambled to adjust its propaganda. At one rally, the chaos had been palpable as the speaker abruptly shifted his speech halfway through. The crowd had been informed that Oceania was not, and had never been, at war with Eurasia. Instead, Oceania had always been locked in battle with East Asia. The crowd, previously waving signs denouncing Eurasia, had suddenly felt confused and shifted the blame to Emmanuel Goldstein's agents for the mix-up. Despite the confusion, their fervor against East Asia had remained unshaken. Later, in the sanctuary of Mr. Charrington's room, Winston had dived into Goldstein's The Theory and Practice of Oligarchical Collectivism, a book given to him by O'Brien. The book had been dense and daunting, its chapters echoing the party's slogans like "War is peace and ignorance is strength." It had outlined a chilling theory of social stratification across recent history: the inner party, the outer party, and the proles. According to Goldstein, Eurasia had been formed when Russia absorbed all of Europe, Oceania had been established when the United States took over the British Empire, and East Asia comprised the remaining nations. These three superstates perpetuated a never-ending border conflict to maintain their power, as no two allies could overpower the third. This perpetual war, Goldstein had argued, was designed to keep the masses ignorant of life outside their borders, illustrating the true meaning of war is peace. Winston paused his reading as the distant roar of a rocket bomb echoed in the background. The joy of being alone with the forbidden book in a room free of telescreens still lingered. He felt a deep sense of solitude and safety, mingled with the comfort of his tired body, the softness of the chair, and the gentle breeze from the window against his cheek. The book captivated him, not with new information, but with reassurance. It reflected his own scattered thoughts, presenting them in a more coherent and powerful manner. Winston realized that the best books are those that resonate with what one already knows. As Winston read, Julia entered the room and lay in bed next to him. After spending half an hour in bed together with the distant sound of a woman singing outside, Winston read aloud to Julia from Goldstein's manifesto. The book revealed that controlling history was a crucial tactic of the party, with Doublethink allowing inner party members to be the most fervent supporters of the war mentality, despite knowing the historical narratives they propagated were false. Doublethink meant the act of simultaneously accepting two contradictory beliefs as true, even if they conflicted with one's own memory or sense of reality. Eventually, Winston had checked to see if Julia was still awake. She was not, and he had drifted off to sleep. His final thought had lingered on the unsettling notion that sanity is not statistical. The next morning, as Winston lay in bed, the shrill voice of the woman outside began to sing, piercing the quiet of dawn and waking Julia from her sleep. Through the grimy window, Winston gazed at the woman, struck by her robust vitality. Winston contemplated that from his love with Julia, no child would ever be born, and compared that with the woman singing carelessly in the yard, wondering how many children she might have given birth to. He reminisced about the thrush that had sung to them on their first day by the edge of the wood. Julia dismissed the memory, stating that the bird had sung for its own pleasure, not for them. Winston reflected on the contrast between the party's lack of song and the joy of the proles and birds across the world, from London to Paris and beyond. He daydreamed of a time when the proles, those seemingly insignificant masses, might awaken to their own power and rise against the party's grip. In their shared moment of reflection, Winston and Julia both acknowledged their grim reality. "We are the dead," they murmured in unison, recognizing their fated doom. But then from the shadows, a chilling voice interrupted their resignation with the grim statement, "You are the dead." The words sent a shiver down their spines as they suddenly realized the truth. A telescreen, cleverly concealed behind a picture of St. Clement's Church, had been eavesdropping on their every word. From that moment onward, until the thought police broke in, every word they spoke was repeated back to them from the telescreen. Panic seized them as the rhythmic pounding of boots filled the air. The house was surrounded. A haunting voice began reciting the final lines of the St. Clement's rhyme. "Here comes a candle to light you to bed. Here comes a chopper to chop off your head." The window shattered in a shower of glass, and the regime's troops stormed into the room, their presence like a dark tide. In the chaos, the troops smashed the delicate paperweight that had once seemed so symbolic to Winston. As he watched its fragments scatter across the floor, he was struck by the irony of its smallness in the face of his colossal fear. The troops violently kicked Winston and beat Julia, leaving him disoriented. As Winston struggled and the troops restrained him, Mr. Charrington, his seemingly benign landlord, entered the room. Mr. Charrington, once a symbol of resistance and safety, now commanded one of the troops to gather the shards of the shattered paperweight. The horrifying realization dawned on Winston. Mr. Charrington's voice had been the one coming from the telescreen all along. He was, in fact, a member of the thought police, and the illusion of sanctuary they had clung to had been nothing more than a trap. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed my summary of the second part of George Orwell's 1984. Don't forget the first and third parts are also available on the channel. Plus, be sure to download our channel's free companion app for access to quizzes, free ebooks, and much more. If you would like to support the channel, consider becoming a member, liking, sharing, and subscribing. Your engagement helps keep this literary conversation going. Until next time, keep reading and exploring the world of words.